The scuffed leather told 1,000 stories that none of them bothered to read. While her classmates strutted through the halls of Clearwater High in their pristine sneakers and designer boots, Maya Chun's combat boots bore the weight of something. Deeper something that would soon save all their lives. Maya Chun had been invisible for 3 years at Clearwater High School in rural Montana. Not the kind of invisible that comes from being shy or forgettable, but the deliberate kind. Kind where you perfect the art of moving through hallways like smoke, never quite catching anyone's attention long enough to become a target. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Her faded black combat boots struck the linoleum floor with a distinctive rhythm as she made her way to first period chemistry. The boots had seen better days, better years, actually. The leather was cracked along the sides. The laces frayed and knotted where they'd broken and been retired, and the solace worn smooth from countless miles of walking. They were the only shoes she owned that fit properly, handed down from her older brother Marcus before he'd shipped out to Afghanistan 2 years ago. "Nice boots, Army girl," came the familiar sneer from behind her. Maya didn't turn around. She knew the voice belonged to Chelsea Morrison, the kind of girl who wielded popularity like a weapon and had perfected the art of cutting people down with surgical precision. Chelsea's crew followed close behind Madison, Brianna, and Jessica, their matching designer sneakers squeaking against the floor in perfect synchronization. "Where'd you get them?" "The thrift store." Madison chimed in, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Or did you pull them off some homeless veteran?" The hallway seemed to part around them, other students either too intimidated to intervene or too entertained to stop the show. Maya kept walking, her jaw set in a hard line, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "I'm talking to you," Chelsea said, her voice rising. She quickened her pace, closing the distance between them. "Don't you have any manners?" Maya finally stopped and turned around, her dark eyes meeting Chelsea's with a steady, unflinching gaze. "They're just boots," she said quietly. "Just boots?" Chelsea laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Honey, those things are practically falling apart. Don't you have any self-respect?" The crowd of students had begun to gather now, sensing drama. Maya glanced around at the sea of faces, some curious, some cruel, most just hungry for entertainment. She spotted a few familiar faces from her advanced placement classes, kids who knew she consistently scored higher than almost everyone else, but even they remained silent. "My brother gave them to me," Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your brother?" Chelsea's eyes lit up with predatory interest. "Let me guess he's in jail?" "He's serving overseas," Maya replied, her voice steady despite the fire building in her chest. "Oh, how noble," Chelsea said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Well, maybe he can send you some new boots from whatever desert he's hiding in." The crowd laughed, and Maya felt something cold settle in her stomach. She'd endured 3 years of this, 3 years of being the poor kid, the quiet kid, the one who didn't fit in. Her father worked double shifts at the lumber mill. Her mother cleaned houses for the wealthy families whose children now surrounded her. And Maya worked weekends at the local diner to help make ends meet. But her boots weren't just footwear. They were a connection to Marcus, who'd taught her everything she knew about surviving in hostile territory. They were a reminder of the summer he'd spent teaching her to navigate the wilderness that surrounded their small town, showing her how to read the land, how to find shelter, how to stay alive when everything went wrong. "At least I don't need Daddy's credit card to buy my identity," Maya said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. The hallway went dead silent. Chelsea's face flushed red, her perfectly manicured hands clenched into fists. "What did you just say to me?" "You heard me," Maya said, surprised by her own boldness. "Some of us don't need to buy our way through life." The confrontation might have escalated further, But the sharp sound of the first period bell cut through the tension. Students began to disperse, filing into their respective classrooms with disappointed murmurs. Chelsea leaned close to Maya, her voice low and venomous. "You just made a big mistake, Army girl. You have no idea who you're dealing with." Maya watched her walk away, surrounded by her circle of followers, and felt a familiar knot of anxiety form in her stomach. She'd managed to fly under the radar for 3 years, but now she'd painted a target on her back. In a school where social hierarchies were everything, she'd just declared war on the queen bee. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of whispered conversations and pointed stares. Maya tried to focus on her classes, but she could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on her and could hear her name being passed around in hushed tones. By lunch, the story had already begun to morph and grow. As these things always did in high school, she found her usual spot in the cafeteria, a corner table near the emergency exit, where she could eat in peace and disappear quickly if needed. But today, peace wasn't an option. Chelsea and her friends occupied the prime real estate in the center of the room, their laughter echoing off the walls as they held court over their domain. "She thinks she's so tough," Jessica was saying her voice intentionally loud enough to carry across the room. "Did you see those boots? They're literally falling apart." "It's actually kind of sad," Madison added, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "I mean, she probably can't afford anything else." Maya tried to focus on her sandwich peanut butter and jelly, the same thing she'd eaten for lunch every day for 3 years, but the comments continued to fly. Each word was carefully chosen, designed to humiliate and isolate her further. "My dad says her family lives in that trailer park off Route 7. Brianna chimed in. "You know, the one with all the rusted cars in the front yards?" That wasn't true. Maya's family lived in a small but well-maintained house on the outskirts of town, but the truth had never been particularly important to Chelsea's crew. They were painting a picture, creating a narrative that would justify their treatment of her. "She probably thinks she's going to be some kind of war hero like her brother," Chelsea said, her voice rising above the cafeteria noise. "Too bad she'll never make it out of this town." Maya's fork clattered against her tray. She'd endured a lot over the years, the whispered comments, the exclusion, the constant feeling of being on the outside looking in. But bringing Marcus into it crossed a line she hadn't even known existed. She stood up slowly, her chair scraping against the floor. The sound seemed to echo in the suddenly quiet cafeteria. Every conversation stopped, every eye turned toward her. Maya walked across the room with measured steps, her combat boots striking the floor with quiet authority. "You don't know anything about my brother," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the silence. "You don't know anything about me." Chelsea stood up to meet her, her height advantage giving her confidence. "I know you're nobody," she said. "I know you'll always be nobody." "Maybe," Maya said, her voice steady. "But at least I don't need to tear other people down to feel good about myself." The confrontation ended when Vice Principal Martinez appeared, drawn by the unnatural quiet in the usually chaotic cafeteria. But the damage was done. Lines had been drawn, and Maya found herself on the wrong side of a war she'd never wanted to fight. The rest of the day passed in a haze of hostile glances and whispered conversations. Maya made it through her classes, but she could feel the social walls closing in around her. By the time the final bell rang, she was exhausted from the constant vigilance, from always being on guard. She gathered her books from her locker and headed for the parking lot, where her mother would be waiting to pick her up, the old Honda Civic was a stark contrast to the SUVs and sports cars that filled the student parking section. But it was reliable, and it got her home. As she walked across the asphalt, she heard footsteps behind her. Chelsea and her friends were following, their voices raised in animated conversation about weekend plans and social media drama. Maya quickened her pace, but the parking lot was large, and her mother's car was parked at the far end. "Maya!" Chelsea called out, her voice sickeningly sweet. "Where are you going? Don't you want to hang out with us?" Maya kept walking, her eyes fixed on the familiar blue Honda. She could see her mother in the driver's seat, probably grading papers from her job as a substitute teacher. Just a few more steps and she'd be safe. "I'm talking to you," Chelsea said, her voice hardening. "Don't be rude." This time, Maya didn't turn around. She reached the car and opened the passenger door, sliding into the seat with relief. Her mother looked up from her papers, concerned about creasing her features. "Everything okay, honey?" "Fine," Maya said, but her voice carried the exhaustion of someone who'd been fighting battles all day, just ready to go home. As they drove through the small town, Maya stared out the window at the familiar landscape. Clearwater was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where generations of families had grown up together, where leaving was often just a dream that never quite became reality. The mountains rose up around them, their peaks still capped with snow even in early spring. This was the landscape that had shaped her, the wilderness that Marcus had taught her to navigate. It was beautiful and harsh and unforgiving, much like the social environment she'd just escaped. "Rough day?" Her mother asked, glancing at her through the rearview mirror. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Maya nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She thought about Marcus, somewhere in the desert on the other side of the world, facing dangers she couldn't even imagine. Her problems at school seemed small in comparison, but they were her reality, her daily battlefield. That evening, she sat in her room working on homework, the sounds of her parents' quiet conversation drifting up from downstairs. Her father had gotten home from the mill, his hands still stained with sawdust and sweat. Her mother was cooking dinner, the smell of homemade soup filling the house. Maya's room was small but organized, her few possessions arranged with military precision, a habit she'd learned from Marcus. On her desk sat a framed photo of her brother. In his dress uniform, his expression serious but proud. Next to it was his last letter, dated 3 months ago, describing the landscape of Afghanistan and the friends he'd made in his unit. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through social media, a mistake she immediately regretted. The pictures from today were already posted, carefully curated shots of Chelsea and her friends looking effortlessly perfect, their expensive clothes and flawless makeup creating an image of success and happiness. Maya looked down at her own reflection in the black screen. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her clothes clean but clearly not designer. She thought about the boots sitting by her bedroom door, the leather cracked and worn but still sturdy, still reliable. Tomorrow would bring more of the same, more stares, more whispered comments, more reminders that she didn't belong. But she'd survived 3 years of it, and she'd survive more. She had to. Outside her window, the mountains stood silent and watchful, their ancient presence a reminder that there were bigger things in the world than high school drama. Maya closed her textbook and prepared for bed, her combat boots standing guard by the door, ready for whatever tomorrow might bring. She had no idea that within 48 hours, those boots would carry her through terrain that would test every survival skill Marcus had taught her, and that the classmates who mocked her today would soon be depending on her for their very lives. The wilderness was about to become their classroom, and Maya Chun was about to become their teacher. The annual Clearwater High Wilderness Education trip had been a tradition for 15 years, designed to teach students about local ecology and outdoor survival skills. What most students didn't know was that it had originally been implemented after a tragic hiking accident in 2008, when 3 students from a neighboring school had gotten lost in the mountains and died from exposure. Maya sat in the back of the school bus, watching the familiar scenery roll past through rain-streaked windows. The weather had been deteriorating all morning, with dark clouds gathering over the mountain peaks like a warning nobody wanted to heed. She'd checked the forecast obsessively the night before. Severe weather warning, possible flash flooding. Temperatures drop into near freezing at higher elevations. The bus lurched as it navigated another sharp curve on the mountain road. Maya's stomach tightened, not from motion sickness, but from the knowledge that they were heading into conditions that would challenge even experienced hikers. She'd tried to talk to Mr. Peterson, the biology teacher leading the trip, but he'd dismissed her concerns with a patronizing smile. "Don't worry, Miss Chun," he'd said. "We've been doing this trip for years. A little rain never hurt anyone." But Maya knew the difference between a little rain and what was building in the sky above them. The clouds were moving fast, their edges sharp and angry. The wind had picked up, causing the bus to rock slightly as it climbed higher into the mountains. These weren't conditions for a leisurely educational hike. They were conditions that demanded respect and preparation. "This is going to be so lame," Chelsea complained from her seat near the front, her voice carrying easily through the bus. 3 days of hiking and sleeping in tents. My dad should have just let me skip this whole thing. At least we'll get some good photos for Instagram, Madison replied, already posing with her phone. The mountains are actually pretty in a rustic kind of way. Maya almost laughed at the absurdity of it. These girls had no idea what they were walking into. They'd packed designer hiking boots that had never touched dirt, moisture-wicking athletic. Where that cost more than Maya's family spent on groceries in a month, and enough electronic devices to power a small city. The bus finally reached the trailhead parking area, a small clearing carved out of the forest with basic facilities, a few picnic tables, an information board, and restrooms that had seen better days. As the students filed off the bus, Maya noticed several things that made her stomach clench with worry. First, the wind was stronger than it had appeared from inside the bus. The trees were swaying ominously, their branches creaking with each gust. Second, the temperature had dropped at least 10 degrees since they'd left the school, and they were still hours away from the higher elevations where they'd be camping. Third, the clouds were moving in a pattern that suggested an approaching storm system, not the scattered showers that had been predicted. "All right, everyone," Mr. Peterson called out, his voice competing with the wind. "Let's get organized. We have about 6 hours of hiking ahead of us to reach our campsite. 6 hours. Maya's mind raced as she calculated distances and elevation changes. Under normal conditions, the hike to Pine Ridge campsite was challenging but manageable. But these weren't normal conditions, and this wasn't an experienced group of hikers. She watched as her classmates struggled with their oversized backpacks, many of them clearly having never worn a properly fitted pack before. Several students were already complaining about the weight, and they hadn't even started hiking yet. Meanwhile, the parent volunteers who had come along to help seemed more interested in taking photos than paying attention to the deteriorating weather. "Maya," Mr. Peterson called out, consulting his clipboard. "You're in Group C with Chelsea, Madison, Brianna, and Jessica. Mrs. Henderson will be your group supervisor." Maya's heart sank. Not only was she stuck with the group of girls who made her life miserable, but Mrs. Henderson was a parent volunteer with no wilderness experience whatsoever. She was a real estate agent who wore full makeup on a hiking trip and had brought a purse instead of a day pack. "Great," Chelsea muttered as Maya approached the group. "We get stuck with the weird girl. At least someone in our group knows what they're doing," Mrs. Henderson said, trying to keep things positive. "Maya, I hear you're quite the outdoors person." Maya nodded, her eyes scanning the group's equipment. Chelsea's pack was bright pink and looked like it had never been used. Madison had attached so many accessories to her pack that it looked like a Christmas tree. Brianna was wearing makeup. That would be washed off by the first raindrop, and Jessica was already shivering in her designer jacket that looked fashionable but offered little actual warmth. "We should probably get some rain gear distributed," Maya said, looking at Mrs. Henderson. The weather's about to turn." "Oh, don't worry," Mrs. Henderson replied with a wave of her hand. "The forecast only called for light showers. We'll be fine." Maya wanted to argue, but she knew it would be pointless. Instead, she adjusted her own pack, checking the placement of her rain gear and emergency supplies. Her pack was old and practical, every item carefully selected and positioned for easy access. She'd learned to pack from Marcus, who'd taught her that in the wilderness, preparation wasn't just helpful, it was survival. The group began hiking, following a well-marked trail that wound through dense forest. At first, the conversation was light and cheerful. The students were excited about the adventure, taking selfies and chatting about school gossip. But as the trail began to climb and the packs grew heavier, the mood started to shift. "This is harder than I thought it would be," Jessica painted, stopping to rest after only 30 minutes of hiking. "We've barely started," Maya said, checking her watch. "We need to keep moving if we want to reach camp before dark." "Since when are you the leader?" Chelsea snapped, sweat already beading on her forehead despite the cool air. Maya bit back her response, focusing instead on the trail ahead. The path was becoming steeper, and she could see storm clouds gathering more densely above the trees. The wind was picking up, sending leaves and small branches skittering across the ground as they climbed higher. The forest began to change. The trees grew smaller and more sparse, giving way to exposed rock faces and narrow ledges. This was where the real wilderness began, where cell phone service disappeared and the nearest road was miles away. "I can't get any signal," Madison complained, holding her phone up toward the sky. "How am I supposed to post anything?" The truth of that statement seemed to hit the group all at once. They were no longer in their comfortable suburban world where problems could be solved with a phone call or a credit card. They were in the wilderness where nature made the rules and didn't care about social status or designer labels. Mrs. Henderson was struggling too, her lack of conditioning showing as she huffed and puffed up the steeper sections. Maya watched her with growing concern, recognizing the signs of someone who was pushing beyond their physical limits. "Maybe we should take a longer break," Maya suggested, noticing that several group members were falling behind. "No," Mrs. Henderson gasped, trying to project authority. "We need to keep up with the schedule. The other groups are probably way ahead of us." That wasn't true. Maya could see 2 other groups still below them on the trail, but she didn't argue. Instead, she positioned herself at the back of the group, where she could keep an eye on everyone and make sure no one got left. Behind, the first drops of rain began to fall around noon, just as they reached a particularly exposed section of trail. The droplets were cold and heavy, the kind that soaked through clothing quickly and chilled the body to the bone. "Oh no," Brianna whined, looking down at her designer hiking outfit. "This is going to ruin my clothes." "Rain gear," Maya said firmly, already pulling her waterproof jacket from her pack. "Everyone needs to put on rain gear now." But as the group fumbled through their packs, a disturbing reality became clear. Despite the gear list that had been provided weeks earlier, most of them had inadequate rain protection. Chelsea had brought a light windbreaker that would be useless in a real storm. Madison's rain jacket was more of a fashion statement than functional gear. Jessica didn't have any rain gear at all. "This is fine," Mrs. Henderson said, pulling on a flimsy plastic poncho. "It's just a light shower." Maya looked up at the sky, where the clouds were now so thick they blocked out most of the daylight. The wind was picking up steadily and the temperature was dropping fast. This wasn't a light shower, this was the beginning of a serious storm. "We need to find shelter," Maya said, her voice urgent. "These conditions are going to get worse." "Don't be dramatic," Chelsea said, but her voice lacked its usual confidence. She was shivering now, her inadequate clothing providing little protection against the elements. The rain intensified quickly, turning from scattered drops to a steady downpour. In a matter of minutes, the trail became slippery, the rocks treacherous with moisture. Maya watched in growing alarm as her classmates struggled to maintain their footing, their inexperience showing with every step. "I can't see anything," Jessica called out, her voice barely audible over the sound of rain and wind. "Where's the trail?" Maya realized that the group was beginning to panic. The comfortable suburban teenagers who had started the hike were being replaced by scared, cold, and increasingly desperate young people who had no idea how to handle the situation they found themselves in. "Stay together," Maya called out, her voice carrying the authority she'd learned from years of hiking with Marcus. "Follow the trail markers. Don't try to take shortcuts." But even as she spoke, she knew they were in serious trouble. The storm was intensifying faster than anyone had predicted, and they were still hours away from the designated campsite. The group was poorly equipped, poorly prepared, and led by adults who had no idea how to handle wilderness emergencies. As they continued climbing, Maya's mind raced through their options. They could try to push forward to the campsite, but that would mean hours of hiking in increasingly dangerous conditions. They could try to turn back, but the trail down was just as treacherous as the trail up. Or they could find emergency shelter and wait out the storm. "There's a ranger station about 2 miles ahead," Mrs. Henderson said, consulting her soggy trail map. "We can rest there." Maya knew the ranger station Mrs. Henderson was referring to. It was abandoned and closed for budget cuts 3 years ago. But she also knew that the building might still provide some shelter, which was more than they'd have in the open wilderness. "Let's go," Maya said, taking the lead for the first time, "but we need to stay together. No one falls behind." As they hiked toward the abandoned ranger station, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into something far more dangerous than a simple school trip. The storm was building to what looked like a serious weather event, and they were caught in the middle of it with inadequate gear and inexperienced leadership. The combat boots that had earned her so much mockery now gripped the slippery rocks with confidence, carrying her steadily forward while her classmates struggled behind her. Maya began to realize that the very things that made her different, her practical gear, her wilderness knowledge, her ability to stay calm under pressure, might be the only things that could save them all. The storm was just beginning, and they were about to learn that in the wilderness, survival wasn't about popularity or social status. It was about preparation, knowledge, and the ability to make hard decisions when everything went wrong. As thunder rumbled overhead and the rain turned to sleet, Maya Shun stepped into a role she'd never wanted but had been preparing for her entire life. The girl they'd mocked for her faded combat boots was about to become their only hope for survival. The abandoned ranger station appeared through the sheets of rain like a mirage, its weathered wooden structure barely visible against the gray backdrop of the storm. Maya felt a momentary surge of relief until she got close enough to see the reality of their supposed shelter. The building was in worse condition than she'd remembered. Windows were boarded up, the roof had several obvious gaps, and the front door hung at an odd angle on rusted hinges. "This is our shelter?" Chelsea's voice cracked with disbelief and growing panic. Her designer hiking outfit was completely soaked through, and she was shivering uncontrollably despite the constant movement of the hike. "It's better than nothing," Maya replied, pushing through the broken door. Inside, the station was musty and dark, with evidence of years of neglect. But it was dry, and that was the most important thing right now. The group huddled inside, their breath visible in the cold air. Maya immediately began assessing their situation with the methodical approach Marcus had taught her. She checked everyone for signs of hypothermia, examined their gear, and took inventory of their supplies. What she found was terrifying. Jessica was showing early signs of hypothermia, uncontrollable shivering, confusion, and difficulty speaking. Clearly, her lips had taken on a bluish tint that Maya recognized as dangerous. Madison's expensive hiking boots had given her massive blisters that were now bleeding through her socks. Brianna was hyperventilating, her carefully controlled composure finally cracking under the pressure of their situation. "We need to get warm," Maya said, her voice cutting through the group's scattered complaints. "And we need to do it now." "How?" Mrs. Henderson asked, her own voice shaking with cold and fear. "We don't have any way to make a fire. The matches are all wet." Maya reached into her pack and pulled out a waterproof container that held dry matches, fire starter, and a small survival candle. "Never keep all your fire-starting materials in one place," she said, echoing one of Marcus's lessons. "And always keep them completely waterproof." While Maya worked on getting a small fire started in the station's old fireplace, she could hear the storm intensifying outside. The wind was howling now, rattling the boarded windows and sending drafts through every crack in the building. But more concerning was the sound of water, not just rain, but flowing water, lots of it. "Listen," Maya said, pausing in her fire-building efforts. "Do you hear that?" The group went quiet, straining to hear over the storm. There it was, the unmistakable sound of rushing water, growing louder by the minute. "That's the creek," Mrs. Henderson said, consulting her soggy map. "It runs right below the station. It's probably just a little higher than usual because of the rain." Maya knew better. She'd hiked this area dozens of times with Marcus, and she knew that the creek Mrs. Henderson was referring to was actually Clearwater Creek, which was fed by mountain runoff from 3 different peaks. During heavy rains, it could rise from a gentle stream to a raging torrent in a matter of hours. "We need to check the water level," Maya said, moving toward the door. "Don't go out there," Chelsea said, grabbing Maya's arm. "It's too dangerous." For the first time in 3 years, Chelsea Morrison was looking at Maya with something other than disdain. It was fear, pure and simple, and the recognition that Maya might be the only one who could get them out of this alive. Maya gently freed her arm and stepped outside into the storm. The rain hit her like a physical blow, but her waterproof jacket held up. She made her way carefully around the building to where she could see the creek. What she saw made her blood run cold. The creek had risen at least 6 feet and was still climbing. The water was moving fast, carrying debris, branches, rocks, and what looked like parts of a bridge from somewhere upstream. The sound was deafening, like a freight train running through the forest. Worse, the water was already lapping at the foundation of the ranger station. Within an hour, maybe less, the building would be partially flooded. Within 2 hours, it might be completely underwater. Maya rushed back inside, her mind racing through their options. They couldn't stay here. The flooding would force them out soon enough. But they couldn't hike out in these conditions either. The trail they'd come up would be impassable, and the trail to the original campsite would be even more dangerous. "We have to move," Maya announced, her voice cutting through the group's conversation. "The creek is flooding. This whole area is going to be underwater within the hour." "What?" Mrs. Henderson looked at her in disbelief. "That's impossible. It's just a little rain." "Look for yourself," Maya said, pointing toward the door. "But don't go too close to the water. The current is strong enough to sweep you away." One by one, the group members ventured outside to see the rising water. Each returned with the same expression of shock and growing terror. The comfortable denial they'd been wrapped in was finally shattered by the reality of their situation. "Where can we go?" Jessica asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The hypothermia was getting worse, and Maya knew they didn't have much time. Before it became life-threatening, Maya closed her eyes and visualized the topographic map Marcus had made her memorize years ago. There was higher ground about a mile northeast of their current position, a rocky outcrop that would be above the flood line. But getting there would mean leaving the relative safety of the station and venturing into the full force of the storm. "There's a place we can go," Maya said, "but it's not going to be easy." She explained about the rocky outcrop, drawing a rough map in the dust on the floor. The route would take them up a steep slope through dense forest, then across an exposed ridgeline before dropping down to a natural shelter formed by an overhang of rock. "That's crazy," Chelsea said. "We'll never make it in this weather." "We'll never make it if we stay here," Maya replied. "The water's rising fast. In an hour, we'll be forced to leave anyway, and by then we'll be in even more danger." Mrs. Henderson looked around the group, her face reflecting the weight of responsibility she was completely unprepared for. "What do you think we should do?" The question was directed at Maya, and everyone knew it. Somehow, in the space of a few hours, the social hierarchy that had defined their lives at school had been completely turned upside down. The girl they'd mocked and marginalized was now their best hope for survival. "We go now," Maya said, "while we still can." She began organizing the group with military efficiency, checking everyone's packs and redistributing supplies. Jessica was in no condition to carry much, so Maya divided her gear among the others. She gave her own rain jacket to Brianna, whose flimsy windbreaker was useless, and helped Madison wrap her bleeding feet as best she could. "Stay close together," Maya instructed as they prepared to leave. "Follow in my footsteps exactly. Don't try to take shortcuts or go around obstacles. If someone falls, everyone stops until we can help them up." The moment they stepped outside, Maya knew they were in for the fight of their lives. The storm had reached full intensity, with wind gusts strong enough to knock them off their feet and rain so heavy it was difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. The sound of the flooding creek was constant and ominous, a reminder of what would happen if they didn't move fast enough. Maya led the group away from the station, following a faint deer trail that led up the mountainside. The path was treacherous, made slippery by the rain and littered with fallen branches and loose rocks. Every step required careful consideration, and Maya found herself constantly looking back to make sure the group was still together. Chelsea was struggling the most, her lack of outdoor experience showing with every stumble. Her designer hiking boots, which had looked so perfect in the store, had no traction on the wet rocks. She'd already fallen twice, each time requiring help to get back up. "I can't do this," she gasped after her third fall. "I'm not strong enough." "Yes, you are," Maya said firmly. "You just need to think differently about how you move. Watch me." Maya demonstrated how to test each step before putting her full weight down, how to use trees and rocks for support, and how to maintain balance on slippery surfaces. She'd learned these skills from Marcus, who'd learned them from his military training and passed them on to her during their summer hikes. "Your boots have good tread," Maya told Chelsea. "You just need to trust them and take smaller steps." Slowly, painfully, the group made their way up the mountainside. The forest provided some protection from the wind, but it also made the path more treacherous, with wet leaves covering hidden rocks and roots. Maya set a steady pace, fast enough to keep them moving, but slow enough that the weaker members could keep up. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 minutes, they reached a small clearing where Maya called a halt. Everyone was exhausted, soaked through, and beginning to show signs of serious fatigue. But they were making progress, and more importantly, they were getting further from the flood zone. "How much further?" Madison asked, her voice barely audible. "Over the storm." "About halfway," Maya replied, checking her compass. "The hardest part is still ahead." The hardest part was the exposed ridgeline, where they would have no protection from the wind and rain. It was also the most dangerous section, with steep drop-offs on both sides and no room for error. "I need everyone to listen carefully," Maya sighed, her voice carrying the authority she'd learned from Marcus. "The next section is going to test everything we have. We'll be completely exposed, and the wind will try to knock us down. I need you to stay low, move one at a time, and keep 3 points of contact with the ground at all times." As they prepared to leave the relative safety of the trees, Maya felt the full weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. 5 lives depended on her knowledge, her judgment, and her ability to stay calm under pressure. The combat boots that had made her a target for ridicule were now the only thing standing between her classmates and disaster. The storm showed no signs of letting up, and Maya knew that the worst was yet to come. They were about to face the most dangerous part of their journey, and she was the only one who could get them through it alive. As they stepped out onto the exposed ridge, Maya said a silent prayer to Marcus, wherever he was, hoping that everything he'd taught her would be enough to save them all. The wilderness was about to test them in ways they'd never imagined, and failure wasn't an option. The girl they'd mocked for her faded combat boots was now their only hope, and she was about to prove that sometimes the most important strength comes from the most unexpected places. The exposed ridgeline stretched before them like a knife's edge against the storm-darkened sky. Wind gusts of 40 miles per hour hammered the mountainside, carrying with them sheets of freezing rain that felt like needles against exposed skin. Maya crouched low, studying the terrain ahead while the others huddled behind a large boulder that provided minimal shelter. The ridge was roughly 200 yards long, with steep drop-offs plunging into darkness on both sides. During clear weather, it would be a challenging but manageable crossing for experienced hikers. In these conditions, it was potentially deadly. "We can't cross that," Mrs. Henderson said, her voice barely audible over the howling wind. "It's suicide." Maya understood the fear, but she also understood their alternatives. Behind them, the floodwaters were still rising. She could see the glow of emergency lights in the valley below, probably search and rescue teams responding to reports of the flooding. But those teams were miles away and had no idea where Maya's group was located. "We have rope," Maya said, pulling a coil of climbing rope from her pack. "We can create a safety line." "Where did you get that?" Chelsea asked, staring at the rope with a mixture of surprise and hope. "Emergency gear," Maya replied simply. "My brother made me promise to always carry the basics: rope, first aid, emergency shelter, extra food." The truth was, Maya carried more emergency equipment than most experienced mountaineers. Marcus had been obsessive about preparation, drilling into her the importance of being ready for any situation. What had seemed like paranoia back then now looked like wisdom. Maya began setting up a safety system, anchoring the rope to solid rock formations and creating a line that would allow each person to cross the ridge while remaining connected to a secure point. It was a complex process that required knowledge of knots, anchor points, and rope dynamics, knowledge that Marcus had insisted she learn. "How do you know how to do all this?" Jessica asked. Her hypothermia symptoms had stabilized somewhat, but she was still weak and disoriented. "My brother taught me," Maya said, testing the strength of her anchor. "He said you never know when you might need to save someone's life." As Maya worked, she became aware that the dynamic of the group had fundamentally shifted. The girls who had spent 3 years treating her like she was invisible were now watching her every move with intense attention. Mrs. Henderson had essentially abdicated any pretense of leadership, recognizing that she was completely out of her depth. "Okay," Maya said, completing her safety setup. "Here's how this works. One person crosses at a time, clipped into the safety line. Keep low, test each step, and whatever you do, don't panic if the wind hits you. The rope will keep you safe." The rain, without it, she looked younger and more vulnerable than Maya had ever seen her. "I do," Maya said without hesitation. "I need to set up the anchor on the other side and make sure the route is safe." Maya clipped her harness to the safety line and began the crossing. The moment she stepped out of the shelter of the boulder, the full force of the storm hit her. The wind tried to push her sideways off the narrow ridge, and the rain was so intense she could barely see where she was stepping. But her combat boots held firm on the wet rock, their worn soles finding purchase where newer, less experienced footwear might have slipped. Each step was deliberate and controlled, her body low to reduce wind resistance, her hands maintaining contact with the safety line. Halfway across, a massive gust of wind hit the ridge, strong enough to lift Maya briefly off her feet. For a terrifying moment, she dangled from the safety line, her boots scrambling for purchase on the slick rock. But her anchor held, and she managed to get her feet back under her. The watching group gasped in unison, but Maya didn't pause. She continued across, her focus absolute, until she reached the far side where she could establish the second anchor point. "Okay," she called back through the storm. "Send Jessica across." First, Jessica was the most vulnerable member of the group, still struggling with the early stages of hypothermia. Maya wanted to get her to shelter as quickly as possible. The crossing took Jessica nearly 10 minutes, with Maya constantly calling out encouragement and guidance. But she made it, collapsing in relief on the far side. One by one, the others followed. Madison, despite her bleeding feet, managed the crossing with determination that surprised everyone, including herself. Brianna crossed in a state of barely controlled panic, but she crossed. Mrs. Henderson took nearly 15 minutes, stopping multiple times to rest and regain her composure. Chelsea was last, and by the time she began her crossing, the storm had intensified even further. Maya watched anxiously as Chelsea inched her way across the ridge, her movements becoming increasingly erratic as fatigue and fear took their toll. "Take your time," Maya called out. "Don't rush. The rope has you." But Chelsea was panicking now, her breathing rapid and shallow. Halfway across, she froze, clinging to the safety line and unable to move forward or backward. "I can't do it," she called out, her voice breaking. "I'm going to fall." Maya made a split-second decision. She clipped back into the safety line and began moving toward Chelsea, crossing the ridge from the opposite direction. "What are you doing?" Mrs. Henderson called out. "It's too dangerous." Maya ignored her, focused entirely on reaching Chelsea. The wind was stronger now, with gusts that threatened to tear both of them from the mountain. When she reached Chelsea, Maya could see that the other girl was completely overwhelmed, her carefully constructed confidence shattered by the reality of their situation. "Look at me," Maya said, her voice cutting through the storm. "Not down, not at the drop-offs. Look at me." Chelsea's eyes met Maya's, and for the first time in 3 years, there was no hostility there, only fear and desperate hope. "You're going to be okay," Maya said. "But I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" Chelsea nodded, tears mixing with the rain on her face. "We're going to move together," Maya said. "I'll guide your feet. Just follow my lead and don't look down." Step by step, Maya guided Chelsea across the remaining distance. It was the longest 20 yards of Maya's life, with every gust of wind threatening to knock them both off the ridge. But her boots found solid purchase on every step, and her steady guidance kept Chelsea moving forward when they finally reached the far side. Chelsea collapsed, sobbing with relief and exhaustion. Maya knelt beside her, checking for injuries and signs of shock. "Thank you," Chelsea whispered. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for everything." Maya nodded, understanding that something fundamental had changed between them. The crisis had stripped away all the artificial barriers that high school had erected, revealing the basic human truth that they were all just scared teenagers trying to survive. But their ordeal was far from over. The rocky outcrop that was their destination was still half a mile away through dense forest, and the storm showed no signs of abating. Worse, Maya could see that several members of the group were reaching their physical and emotional limits. "How much further?" Mrs. Henderson asked, her voice hollow with exhaustion. "Not far," Maya lied, knowing that the truth would only demoralize them further. "But we need to keep moving. The longer we stay exposed, the more dangerous this becomes." Maya reorganized the group again, redistributing weight and checking everyone's condition. Jessica's hypothermia was stable but not improving. Madison's feet were in bad shape, leaving bloody footprints in the mud. Brianna was showing signs of severe anxiety, and Mrs. Henderson was clearly running on empty. Only Chelsea seemed to have found new strength, the successful crossing having given her confidence she'd never possessed before. "I can help carry things," Chelsea offered, reaching for Jessica's pack. "Are you sure?" Maya asked. "I'm sure," Chelsea said firmly. "We're a team now, right?" Maya nodded, struck by how completely the social dynamics of their group had transformed. The girl who had been her primary tormentor was now offering to help carry equipment. The popular clique that had ruled the school had been replaced by a group of survivors who understood that their differences were meaningless in the face of life and death. As they prepared to enter the forest for the final push to shelter, Maya felt a new kind of responsibility settling on her shoulders. These weren't just her classmates anymore, they were her team, and their survival depended entirely on her knowledge and leadership. The forest ahead was dark and threatening, filled with the sounds of crashing trees and rushing water. Maya knew that the next hour would be the most dangerous yet, as they navigated treacherous terrain in near-zero visibility, while fighting exhaustion and hypothermia. But for the first time since the crisis began, Maya felt like they might actually make it. Not because the conditions had improved, they hadn't, but because the group had finally come together as a team. The artificial divisions that had defined their lives at school had been swept away by the storm, replaced by something stronger and more real. Maya checked her compass one last time, adjusting for the magnetic declination that could lead them astray in these mountains. Her combat boots were holding up perfectly, their worn soles still providing reliable traction on every surface they encountered. As they entered the dark forest, Maya realized that she was no longer the girl who had been mocked for her practical gear and quiet demeanor. She had become exactly what Marcus had trained her to be, a leader who could guide others through impossible situations, someone who could remain calm when everything went wrong. The storm raged around them, but Maya Chun was no longer afraid. She had found her strength, and she was going to use it to bring everyone home safely. The forest was a maze of fallen trees and rushing water. What had been a gentle woodland stream, that morning was now a series of dangerous torrents cutting across their path. Maya led the group through the chaos with surgical precision, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness as she identified safe routes around the worst obstacles. "Stream crossing ahead," Maya called back, her voice steady despite the exhaustion she felt creeping into her bones. "It's about 15 feet wide and moving fast." The group gathered at the water's edge, staring at what had once been a peaceful creek. The current was now powerful enough to sweep away anyone who lost their footing, and the water was filled with debris, branches, rocks, and chunks of what looked like a wooden bridge from somewhere upstream. "There's no way we can cross that," Mrs. Henderson said, her voice cracking with despair. "We're trapped." Maya studied the water, her mind working through the problem with methodical calm. Downstream, she could see where a massive pine tree had fallen across the current, creating a natural bridge about 50 yards away. The trunk was thick enough to walk on, but it would be slippery and dangerous in these conditions. "We can use the fallen tree," Maya said, pointing through the rain. "It's not ideal, but it's our best option." As they made their way to the makeshift bridge, Maya noticed that Jessica was getting worse. The hypothermia was progressing despite their efforts to keep her warm and moving. Her speech was becoming slurred, and she was having trouble maintaining her balance. "I need to check Jessica," Maya told Chelsea, who had stayed close to her since the ridge crossing. "Can you scout ahead and make sure the tree is stable?" Chelsea nodded, her transformation from tormentor to trusted teammate now complete. She moved ahead with surprising confidence, testing the fallen trunk and calling back information about its condition. Maya knelt beside Jessica, checking her pulse and looking for signs of severe hypothermia. What she found was alarming. Jessica's core temperature was dropping dangerously low, and her body was beginning to shut down non-essential functions. We need to get her warm immediately, Maya said to the group. This isn't just about being cold anymore. She's going into a medical crisis. Maya made a difficult decision. She pulled out her emergency sleeping bag, a lightweight but highly effective piece of gear that Marcus had insisted she carry. It was designed for one person, but it might be enough to stabilize Jessica until they could reach proper shelter. Help me get this around her, Maya instructed, wrapping the sleeping bag around Jessica's shivering form. We need to share body heat. Brianna and Madison immediately moved to help, pressing close to Jessica to transfer their warmth. It was a technique Maya had learned from wilderness first aid training, using shared body heat to combat hypothermia. The tree looks solid, Chelsea reported, returning from her scouting mission. But it's going to be slippery. The bark is completely soaked. Maya nodded, her mind already working on a solution. She pulled out a small packet of climbing chalk from her pack, another item that had seemed like overkill when Marcus made her pack it, but which could now save their lives. This will give us better grip, Maya explained, distributing the chalk among the group. Rub it on your hands and the soles of your boots. It'll help with traction on the wet wood. One by one, they crossed the fallen tree. Maya went first, establishing anchor points and calling back guidance. The tree was about 18 inches in diameter, wide enough to walk on, but narrow enough that a single misstep could be fatal. Jessica required special handling. Maya and Chelsea worked together, with Maya crossing first and then helping to guide Jessica across while Chelsea spotted her from behind. It was slow, dangerous work, but they managed to get everyone across safely. On the far side of the stream, Maya called a brief halt to check the group's condition and redistribute their remaining supplies. They were all exhausted, soaked through, and running on reserves they didn't know they had. But they were alive and they were getting closer to shelter. How are you holding up? Maya asked Chelsea during the break. Better than I thought I would, Chelsea admitted. I never imagined I could do any of this. A few hours ago, I was worried about my makeup running in the rain. Maya smiled, remembering the girl who had mocked her boots that morning. It felt like a lifetime ago. You're stronger than you think, Maya said. Most people are, when they have to be. I owe you an apology, Chelsea said suddenly, for everything. The way I treated you, the things I said, you didn't deserve any of that. We'll talk about it when we get home, Maya replied. Right now, we need to focus on survival. But even as she spoke, Maya could feel the situation deteriorating. The storm was intensifying rather than passing through, and their group was reaching the limits of human endurance. Jessica was barely conscious despite their efforts to warm her. Madison's feet were leaving bloody tracks in the mud. Mrs. Henderson was moving like a sleepwalker, her eyes vacant and unfocused. The rocky outcrop that was their destination was still a quarter-mile away through increasingly difficult terrain. Maya began to doubt whether they would all make it. As if responding to her thoughts, Jessica collapsed. She went down suddenly, her legs simply giving out beneath her. Maya was at her side immediately, checking for a pulse and assessing her condition. What she found terrified her. Jessica's pulse was weak and irregular, her breathing shallow, and her skin had taken on a grayish pallor that indicated severe hypothermia. We need to get her to shelter now, Maya said, her voice urgent. She doesn't have much time. Can we carry her? Brianna asked, her own voice shaking with exhaustion and fear. Maya looked at their remaining group, 4 teenagers and 1 adult, all of them running on empty after hours of hiking through the worst conditions any of them had ever experienced. Carrying an unconscious person over rough terrain would be nearly impossible, but they had to try. Maya organized an improvised stretcher using hiking poles and emergency blankets. It wasn't perfect, but it would allow them to share the burden of carrying Jessica while keeping her off the cold ground. We take turns, Maya instructed. 2 people carry while the others rest and navigate. We switch every 5 minutes or whenever someone needs a break. The final quarter mile took them nearly an hour. The terrain was brutal, steep, rocky, and littered with storm debris. Every step required careful consideration, and the weight of carrying Jessica made each movement exponentially more difficult. But gradually, the rocky outcrop came into view. Maya had remembered it correctly, a natural shelter formed by an overhang of stone, protected from the wind and rain. It wasn't comfortable, but it was dry and defensible. As they finally reached the shelter, Maya felt a mixture of relief and grim determination. They had made it to safety, but Jessica's condition was critical. Without proper medical care, she might not survive the night. Maya immediately began setting up their emergency camp, using every piece of gear and knowledge Marcus had given her. She created a warm, dry space for Jessica, distributed their remaining food and water, and established a system for maintaining body heat through the long night ahead. "What happens now?" Mrs. Henderson asked, her voice small and defeated. "Now, we survive until morning," Maya said simply. "And then we figure out how to get home." As the group settled into their shelter, Maya realized that they had crossed more than just a flooded creek and dangerous ridge. They had crossed into a new understanding of themselves and each other. The girl they had mocked for her practical gear and quiet strength had become their salvation, but the real test was just beginning. They had shelter, but limited supplies. They had survived the immediate crisis, but Jessica needed medical attention they couldn't provide. The storm was still raging, and rescue was far from certain. Maya looked around at her exhausted companions, classmates who had become teammates, tormentors who had become friends. Her faded combat boots had carried them all to safety, but tomorrow would bring new challenges that would test everything they had learned about survival and about each other. Dawn broke gray and cold over the mountain shelter, revealing a world transformed by the storm. Maya had barely slept, keeping watch over Jessica, whose condition had stabilized but remained critical. The steady rhythm of her breathing was the only sound besides the dripping of water from the rocky overhang above them. "How is she?" Chelsea whispered, moving carefully to avoid waking the others. "Better," Maya replied quietly. "Her core temperature is coming up and her pulse is stronger, but she needs real medical attention." Maya stood and walked to the edge of their shelter, looking out at the landscape the storm had left behind. The forest was littered with fallen trees, and she could see mudslides scarring the mountainsides where the heavy rain had overwhelmed the soil. In the distance, the valley floor was still partially flooded, with only the tops of buildings visible above the brown water. "Search and rescue will be looking for us," Maya said, more to herself than to Chelsea. "But they'll be dealing with a lot of emergencies. We can't count on being found quickly." Chelsea joined her at the edge of the shelter, and Maya was struck by how different she looked. Gone was the perfectly styled hair and carefully applied makeup. In their place was someone Maya barely recognized, dirt-streaked, exhausted, but somehow more real than she'd ever been. "I keep thinking about yesterday morning," Chelsea said softly. "About the things I said to you, about your boots." Maya looked down at her combat boots, still solid and reliable despite everything they'd been through. The leather was even more scuffed now, marked with mud and scrapes from their harrowing journey, but they had never failed her. "They're just boots," Maya said, echoing her words from the day before. "No," Chelsea said firmly, "they're not. They're the reason we're all alive." As the others began to wake up, Maya started making plans for their rescue. They had a whistle for signaling, but they were too far from any main trail for it to be effective. They could try to hike out, but Jessica wasn't strong enough for the journey, and Maya wasn't sure the rest of the group could handle another day of difficult hiking. Then she remembered something Marcus had taught her during one of their summer hiking trips. He'd shown her how to create a ground-to-air signal that could be seen by search aircraft, a technique he'd learned in his military training. I need everyone to help me with something, Maya announced as the group gathered around their small morning fire. We're going to create a signal that rescue helicopters can see from the air. Using rocks, pieces of their gear, and even some of their clothing, Maya organized the group in creating a large X pattern on a flat area near their shelter. The contrast against the natural terrain would be visible from aircraft, and the universal distress symbol would immediately communicate their need for help. How do you know about this stuff? Madison asked, her bandaged feet propped up while she helped arrange rocks. My brother, Maya said simply. He taught me that knowledge is the most important thing you can carry into the wilderness. It weighs nothing, but it can save your life. As they worked, Maya found herself thinking about Marcus, somewhere on the other side of the world, probably dealing with his own dangerous situations. She wondered if he knew how much his teachings had mattered, how they had quite literally saved lives. There, Maya said as they completed the signal. Now we wait, but they didn't have to wait long. Less than an hour later, the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors echoed through the mountains. Maya grabbed her whistle and began signaling, while the others waved frantically at the aircraft circling overhead. The rescue was swift and professional. The helicopter crew lowered a paramedic who immediately began treating Jessica while preparing the group for extraction. Maya watched with a mixture of relief and pride as her classmates, who had been helpless and panicked just hours before, now worked calmly and efficiently with the rescue team. You did good, kid, the paramedic told Maya as they prepared to lift Jessica into the helicopter. Your first aid probably saved her life. As the helicopter rose above the mountains, Maya looked down at the landscape that had tested them so severely. From the air, she could see the full extent of the flooding, the damaged trails, and the scattered debris that marked the storm's passage. They had been incredibly lucky to survive. But it wasn't just luck, Maya realized. It was preparation, knowledge, and the ability to stay calm when everything went wrong. It was exactly what Marcus had tried to teach her, the rescue maid. The local news, then the state news, and eventually caught national attention. The story of 5 teenagers and their teacher surviving a catastrophic storm became a symbol of resilience and the importance of wilderness preparedness. Maya found herself thrust into an uncomfortable spotlight, with reporters wanting to interview her and schools asking her to speak about survival skills. But what struck her most was the change in her classmates, particularly Chelsea. I've been thinking, Chelsea said one day as they sat together in the school cafeteria, the same cafeteria where she had mocked Maya's boots just weeks earlier, about what you said in the mountains, about knowledge being the most important thing you can carry. Maya looked up from her lunch, surprised. Chelsea rarely spoke to her at school, despite everything they'd been through together. I want to learn, Chelsea continued, about outdoor skills, about being prepared. Would you teach me? The request was so unexpected that Maya almost laughed. But looking at Chelsea's earnest expression, she realized the other girl was completely serious. Sure, Maya said, but you'll need better boots. They both laughed, and Maya realized that something fundamental had changed between them. The artificial barriers of high school social hierarchies seemed meaningless now that they'd faced real challenges together. Over the following months, Maya found herself at the center of a small but growing group of students interested in outdoor skills and emergency preparedness. Chelsea became her most dedicated student, throwing herself into learning wilderness survival with the same intensity she'd once applied to social media and fashion. You know what's funny? Chelsea said one afternoon as they practiced fire-starting techniques in Maya's backyard. I used to think being prepared for emergencies was paranoid. Now I realize it's just smart. Maya smiled, thinking about Marcus and all the lessons he'd drilled into her over the years. His obsession with preparation had seemed excessive at the time, but it had saved 5 lives when it mattered most. The combat boots sat by Maya's bedroom door, more scuffed and worn than ever. She'd gotten new boots for regular hiking, but she kept the old ones as a reminder of everything she'd learned and everything she'd overcome. Sometimes she'd look at them and remember the girl who had been mocked for wearing practical gear, who had been invisible and ignored by her classmates. That girl seemed like a stranger now. In her place was someone who understood that real strength didn't come from fitting in or following the crowd. It came from being prepared, staying calm under pressure, and never giving up when lives were on the line. Maya Chun had always been a survivor. It had just taken a catastrophic storm and a desperate journey through the wilderness for everyone else to see it. The boots that had marked her as different had carried them all to safety, proving that sometimes the most important things are the ones that others fail to understand. The helicopter ride to the hospital was Maya's first time in an aircraft, but she barely noticed the experience. Her attention was focused on Jessica, who remained unconscious but stable under the paramedics' care. Through the aircraft's windows, she could see the full scope of the disaster they'd survived. Entire sections of forest flattened by wind, roads washed out by flooding, and emergency vehicles scattered across the landscape like toys at the hospital. Maya found herself separated from the group for the first time since the crisis began. Medical personnel whisked Jessica away to intensive care while the others were taken for examination and treatment. Maya sat alone in a waiting room, still wearing her muddy clothes and scuffed boots, trying to process everything that had happened. Her parents arrived first, her mother's eyes red with tears she'd been holding back since receiving the emergency call. Her father, normally stoic after years of hard physical labor, broke down completely when he saw her safe. "We thought we'd lost you," her mother whispered, holding Maya tightly. "When they said your group was missing in the storm. I'm okay," Maya said. But even as she spoke the words, she realized how close they'd all come to not being okay. If she hadn't known about the rocky shelter, if she hadn't carried the right equipment, if any number of small decisions had gone differently, the outcome could have been tragic. Over the next several hours, parents arrived to collect their children. Maya watched through the waiting room window as emotional reunions played out in the parking lot. Mrs. Henderson emerged looking haggard but relieved, immediately surrounded by her own family. Madison limped out on crutches, her feet heavily bandaged but her spirits high. Brianna appeared with her usual confidence somewhat restored, though Maya noticed she moved more quietly than before. Chelsea was the last to leave, and she sought out Maya before departing with her parents. "The doctors say Jessica is going to be fine," Chelsea reported. "Full recovery expected. They said if you hadn't known how to treat hypothermia." She didn't finish the sentence, but Maya understood. The wilderness first aid training Marcus had insisted upon had made the difference between life and death. "I meant what I said about learning," Chelsea continued. "About you teaching me. This whole experience, it changed everything for me." After Chelsea left with her family, Maya found herself alone with her thoughts for the first time in 2 days. The hospital's quiet corridors felt surreal after the intensity of their mountain ordeal. She kept expecting to hear wind howling or rain pounding against windows, but there was only the soft hum of air conditioning and distant conversations. The drive home took them past areas affected by the flooding. Maya saw houses with watermarks halfway up their walls, cars buried in mud, and crews working to clear debris from roads. The storm that had nearly killed them had devastated the entire region. The Weather Service is calling it a 100-year event, her father said, navigating around a fallen tree. "Worst flooding in recorded history for this area. Some places got over 8 inches of rain in 6 hours. Maya nodded, understanding now why the conditions had deteriorated so rapidly. They'd been caught in the path of a truly exceptional weather system, the kind that challenged even experienced emergency responders. At home, Maya showered for the first time in 2 days, watching mud and debris swirl down the drain. When she emerged, she found her parents waiting with a phone call from Marcus. "Maya?" Her brother's voice crackled through the international connection, filled with emotion she rarely heard from him. "I just heard about what happened. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Maya said, and for the first time she truly meant it. "Marcus, everything you taught me ... It saved our lives." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Marcus spoke again, his voice was thick with pride and something else, perhaps the recognition that his little sister had grown up in ways he hadn't expected. "Tell me what happened," he said. Maya spent nearly an hour recounting their ordeal, from the first signs of the storm to their final rescue. Marcus listened without interruption, occasionally asking technical questions about her decisions or the conditions they'd faced. "You did everything right," he said when she finished. "Better than right. You adapted to circumstances and kept everyone alive. That's what real leadership looks like." The praise from her brother meant more to Maya than any recognition she might receive from media or school officials. Marcus understood the weight of making life-and-death decisions under pressure. "I have something to tell you," Marcus continued. "I'm coming home. My deployment ends next month, and I've decided not to re-enlist. I want to be closer to my family." The news was unexpected and wonderful. Maya had missed her brother more than she'd realized, and the thought of having him home felt like the perfect conclusion to their ordeal. School resumed a week later, after repairs were made to damage caused by the storm. Maya walked through the familiar hallways with a strange sense of displacement. The building looked the same, but her perspective had fundamentally changed. The social dramas that had once seemed so important now felt trivial compared to the real challenges she'd faced. The reaction from her classmates was mixed and complicated. Some treated her like a celebrity, eager to hear stories about their survival. Others seemed uncomfortable around her, perhaps because her actions had highlighted their own limitations. But Maya found she didn't care about either reaction. The approval or disapproval of people who hadn't shared her experience seemed irrelevant. What mattered was the core group who had been through the ordeal together. Jessica returned to school after 2 weeks, fully recovered, but noticeably changed. She'd lost some of her natural exuberance, replaced by a quiet thoughtfulness that spoke to her brush with mortality. "I keep thinking about how close it was," Jessica confided during lunch one day. "The doctor said another hour in those conditions, and I might not have made it." Madison had developed an unexpected interest in emergency medicine, inspired by watching Maya's first aid techniques save Jessica's life. She'd started volunteering with the local ambulance service and was considering a career in paramedicine. "I never realized how much medical knowledge could matter," Madison said. "When you were working on Jessica, you seemed to know exactly what to do. I want to learn that." Brianna had channeled her experience into advocacy, speaking to younger students about wilderness safety and the importance of proper preparation. Her natural charisma, once used for social manipulation, now served a more meaningful purpose. "I used to think being popular was the most important thing," Brianna explained. "But when you're lost in a storm, none of that matters. What matters is whether you can help or whether you're just dead weight." Mrs. Henderson had taken a leave of absence from her volunteer duties, shaken by how unprepared she'd been for the crisis. Maya had heard through school gossip that she was taking wilderness first aid courses and planning to return only when she felt qualified to actually lead students safely. But it was Chelsea's transformation that was most remarkable. She'd thrown herself into learning outdoor skills with the same intensity she'd once devoted to fashion and social media. She practiced knot tying until her fingers were raw, studied weather patterns with academic rigor, and pestered Maya with constant questions about survival techniques. "I keep thinking about how helpless I was," Chelsea said during one of their weekend training sessions. "How completely dependent I was on you for survival. I never want to feel that helpless again." They were practicing shelter construction in the woods behind Maya's house, using techniques Marcus had taught her years earlier. Chelsea was struggling with the tarp configuration, but her determination was obvious. "It's not about being helpless," Maya said, adjusting Chelsea's rope work. "It's about recognizing what you don't know and being willing to learn. You did that when it mattered most." "I almost got everyone killed," Chelsea said quietly. "If I'd panicked completely on that ridge." "But you didn't," Maya interrupted. "When I came back for you, you trusted me and followed my instructions. That took courage." As spring turned to summer, Maya found herself with a reputation she'd never sought. Local emergency services asked her to speak at training events. The regional newspaper ran a feature story about her survival leadership. Other schools invited her to discuss wilderness preparedness with their students. But Maya remained most proud of the transformation she'd witnessed in her former tormentors. Chelsea had become genuinely interested in environmental conservation, joining Maya for weekend hiking trips and learning to read the landscape with growing skill. The group dynamic that had once been based on exclusion and mockery had evolved into something built on mutual respect and shared experience. "You know what's strange?" Chelsea said during one of their hikes to the same ridge where they'd nearly died. "I can barely remember why I used to care so much about what other people thought of me. It all seems so artificial now." Maya understood exactly what she meant. The storm had stripped away all the superficial concerns that dominated teenage life, revealing what truly mattered when everything else fell away: friendship, loyalty, competence, the ability to remain calm under pressure. When Marcus finally returned from deployment, Maya was waiting at the airport with her parents, wearing the same combat boots that had carried her through the crisis. He emerged from the terminal looking older and more serious than when he'd left, but his face lit up when he saw her. "There's my little sister," he said, sweeping her into a hug. "Though I guess you're not so little anymore." "She saved 5 lives," their father said proudly. "Used everything you taught her." Marcus looked down at Maya's boots, noting the additional scuffs and wear they'd accumulated during their ordeal. "Those old things are really getting some use," he said with a smile. "They've never let me down," Maya replied. That evening Maya recounted the entire story again for Marcus, this time with the benefit of distance and reflection. She could see how each of his lessons had played a role in their survival: the importance of proper gear, the value of staying calm under pressure, the necessity of making hard decisions quickly. "I'm proud of you," Marcus said when she finished. "But more than that, I'm impressed. You took everything I taught you and applied it under conditions I've never faced. You saved people who had treated you badly, and you did it without hesitation." "They weren't bad people," Maya said. "They were just scared teenagers who didn't know how to handle a real crisis. We all were." "Maybe," Marcus said. "But you were the one who kept it together when everyone else was falling apart. That's not something you can teach. That comes from inside." Looking back, Maya realized that the storm had been more than just a natural disaster. It had been a crucible that revealed everyone's true character. She discovered reserves of strength and leadership she hadn't known she possessed. Her classmates had learned that real value came from competence and character, not from social status or material possessions. Most importantly, they'd all learned that in a genuine crisis, artificial divisions disappeared. Rich or poor, popular or outcast, everyone faced the same fundamental challenge: survival. And in that challenge, Maya's practical preparedness and quiet strength had proven more valuable than all the designer gear and social connections her classmates had previously valued. In the end, they hadn't just survived the storm, they had discovered who they really were when everything else was stripped away. And Maya's faded combat boots had walked them all into a new understanding of what it meant to be truly strong. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.